Have you ever watched a judge question everything he believed about marriage and justice because of a single conversation? New York City, October 1948. Judge Charles Brennan had been presiding over civil ceremonies for 15 years, joining hundreds of couples in matrimony. But when Billie Holiday walked into his courtroom with her fiancé, asking to be married, Judge Brennan was about to make a decision that would end his career and force him to confront the difference between law and justice. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell because we uncover the hidden gems that shape the legends we know today. New York Municipal Courthouse, October 14, 1948, 2:30 p.m. Judge Charles Brennan sat in his chambers, reviewing the afternoon's civil ceremony schedule. 3 marriage licenses to be officiated. The Thompson couple, the Rodriguez family, and a Miss Billie Holiday with James Monroe. Judge Brennan didn't recognize the Holiday name, though his secretary had mentioned that the couple might draw some attention. "She's a jazz singer," his secretary had said. "Somewhat famous." Charles Brennan was 58 years old, a product of New York's Irish Catholic community who'd worked his way through law school and built a reputation as a fair but traditional judge. He believed in the sanctity of marriage, the importance of family values, and the necessity of maintaining social order. At 2:45, his secretary knocked. "Judge Brennan, the Holiday Monroe couple is here for their ceremony." "Send them in," Charles replied, straightening his robes. The door opened and Billie Holiday entered, wearing an elegant navy dress and carrying a small bouquet of white flowers. Behind her was James Monroe, a light-skinned black man in a well-tailored suit. Judge Brennan looked up from his papers and stopped moving. He'd expected a jazz singer to look different, less refined, but the woman standing before him carried herself with quiet dignity, her appearance impeccable, her demeanor respectful. "Good afternoon, Your Honor," Billie said quietly. "Thank you for taking the time to marry us." Judge Brennan found himself staring, not at Billie's elegance but at her race. In 15 years of performing civil ceremonies, he'd never married an interracial couple. Hell, he'd never even considered the possibility. "Miss Holiday," Judge Brennan said slowly, looking between Billie and James, "I need to review your marriage license." Charles examined the document carefully, looking for some technical reason to postpone the ceremony. The paperwork was perfect. Both parties were of legal age. Neither had outstanding legal impediments. All fees had been paid. But something was bothering him. Something beyond the paperwork. "Miss Holiday, Mr. Monroe," Judge Brennan said finally, "I need to ask you some questions before we proceed." "Of course, Your Honor," James replied. Are you both certain you understand the implications of this union?" Billie looked confused. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. What implications?" Judge Brennan felt uncomfortable. "The social implications. The challenges you might face." "You mean because we're getting married?" James asked. "I mean because you're different." The word hung in the air. Billie and James exchanged glances. "Different how?" Billie asked quietly. Judge Brennan realized he was walking into dangerous territory, but he couldn't stop himself. "Miss Holiday, you're a Negro woman. Mr. Monroe appears to be, well, of mixed heritage. Are you certain you've considered the difficulties such a marriage might create?" "What difficulties, Your Honor?" "Social acceptance, community reactions, the welfare of any children you might have." Billie was quiet for a long moment. "Judge Brennan, are you saying you won't perform our marriage ceremony?" Charles hesitated. Legally, he had to perform the ceremony. New York law didn't prohibit interracial marriage. But personally, professionally, socially, everything in his background told him this was wrong. "Miss Holiday, I'm concerned about the wisdom of this union." "The wisdom?" "Yes. Whether it's in your best interests, or society's best interests, to formalize this relationship." James stepped forward. "Judge Brennan, with respect, we're not here for counseling. We're here to be married under New York law. Mr. Monroe, I understand your eagerness, but as an officer of the court, I have a responsibility to consider the broader implications of my actions." Billie looked directly at Judge Brennan. "Your Honor, what law prevents you from marrying us?" "No law prevents it, but..." "Then what prevents you?" Judge Brennan felt cornered. Miss Holliday, I believe marriage should unite compatible people. People who share similar backgrounds, values, social positions. And you believe Mr. Monroe and I don't share similar backgrounds? I believe you come from very different worlds. What world do you think I come from? The question was simple, but Judge Brennan realized he didn't actually know anything about Billie beyond her race and profession. He'd made assumptions based on stereotypes. I assume you come from, well, the jazz world, the entertainment world. And what world do you think Mr. Monroe comes from? I'm not certain. Judge Brennan, Mr. Monroe is an attorney. He graduated from Columbia Law School. He practices civil rights law in Manhattan. Does that sound incompatible with my world? Judge Brennan looked surprised. Mr. Monroe is a lawyer? Yes, Your Honor, James said. I've been practicing for 8 years. But you're black. I didn't mean to imply. Judge Brennan, Billie interrupted gently. What do you know about me besides my profession and my race? Charles realized he knew nothing. I'm not familiar with your background. I grew up in Baltimore. I started working when I was 13 to help support my family. I taught myself to sing by listening to records and practicing for hours every day. I've been performing professionally for 15 years. I own my own home, pay my taxes, and have never been arrested or charged with any crime. Judge Brennan listened quietly. Mr. Monroe and I met at a civil rights fundraiser. We discovered we both care deeply about justice, equality, and the possibility of building a better society. We share the same values, the same hopes, the same commitment to living with integrity. But you're from different races. Yes. And you seem to think that's more important than everything else we share. Judge Brennan felt his worldview shifting uncomfortably. Miss Holliday, I'm simply concerned about the practical realities. What practical realities? Social acceptance. Community reactions. Whose community? Well, the broader community. Judge Brennan, Mr. Monroe and I live in Harlem. Our community includes people of many races who work together, socialize together, and support each other. The only community that might object to our marriage is the community that objects to our existence. Charles struggled with this logic. But surely you understand the difficulties. I understand that people like you create difficulties for people like us. But that's not our problem. That's yours. The statement hit Judge Brennan like a physical blow. I beg your pardon. You're not concerned about our welfare. You're concerned about your own comfort. You don't want to marry us because it forces you to acknowledge that your beliefs about race might be wrong. Miss Holliday, I don't appreciate your tone. And I don't appreciate being told that my love for Mr. Monroe is incompatible with your idea of social order. Judge Brennan felt his authority being challenged in a way he'd never experienced. Young lady, I am a judge in this court. And I am an American citizen asking for equal treatment under the law. You're getting equal treatment. Am I? Would you ask a white couple to justify their compatibility? Would you lecture them about social implications? Judge Brennan realized he wouldn't. That's different. How? Because white couples share cultural backgrounds. Judge Brennan, what cultural background do you share with your wife? Charles looked confused. What do you mean? Where was your wife born? What was her family's religion? What social class did she come from? I don't see how that's relevant. Tell me about your cultural compatibility with your wife. Judge Brennan thought about his wife Margaret. She'd been born in Germany, immigrated to New York as a child. She was Lutheran, he was Catholic. Her father had been a factory worker. His had been a policeman. My wife and I come from similar backgrounds, Charles said weakly. Do you? Different countries, different religions, different social classes. Yet you married her without questioning whether it was socially wise. That's completely different. Why? Because we're both white. The words came out before Judge Brennan could stop them. The truth he'd been avoiding was suddenly naked in the room. Judge Brennan, Billie said quietly, you just admitted that the only thing preventing you from marrying us is our race. Charles felt exposed, cornered, forced to confront the reality of his position. Miss Holliday, race is a significant factor in social compatibility. According to whom? According to society. According to common sense. According to the way things work. Judge Brennan, who benefits from the way things work? I don't understand the question. Who benefits from keeping races separate? Who profits from maintaining racial divisions? Charles had never considered this question. Society benefits from social stability. Does society benefit? Or do certain people within society benefit from maintaining their advantages? Miss Holliday, I don't think you understand the complexities of social organization. Explain them to me. Judge Brennan realized he couldn't. His beliefs about racial separation had never been examined intellectually. They were simply assumptions he'd inherited from his community, his family, his social class. Miss Holliday, some things are simply natural. People naturally associate with their own kind. Judge Brennan, if it's natural, why does it require legal enforcement? Why do you need laws to keep people separate if they naturally separate themselves? The question was devastating. Charles had never thought about it this way. Furthermore, Billie continued, if Mr. Monroe and I naturally belong with our own kind, why are we here asking to marry each other? Judge Brennan had no answer. Judge Brennan, I want to ask you something personal. I don't think that's appropriate. You've been questioning our personal compatibility for 20 minutes. I think I'm entitled to one personal question. Charles nodded reluctantly. When you married your wife, did anyone question whether you were compatible? Did any authority figure suggest you reconsider? Did anyone imply that your marriage might be harmful to society? No. Why do you think that is? Because our marriage was conventional. And what makes a marriage conventional? Social acceptance. And what determines social acceptance? Judge Brennan realized where this was leading. The dominant social group. And who belongs to the dominant social group? White people. So social convention isn't actually about what's right or natural. It's about what the dominant group finds comfortable. Charles felt everything he'd believed about social order beginning to collapse. Miss Holliday, surely you understand that some social structures exist for good reasons. Give me one good reason why Mr. Monroe and I shouldn't be allowed to marry. I didn't say you shouldn't be allowed. I said I had concerns about the wisdom. What concerns? Judge Brennan struggled. Every concern he could think of was based on assumptions he could no longer defend. The welfare of your children. What about their welfare? They'll face discrimination. From whom? From people who don't accept racial mixing. So the problem isn't our marriage. The problem is other people's prejudice. Yes, but that prejudice is a reality you'll have to deal with. Judge Brennan, should we avoid living our lives because other people are prejudiced? Should we limit our happiness to make prejudiced people more comfortable? Charles realized how absurd this sounded. When you put it that way. How should I put it? Judge Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Miss Holliday, I need to be honest with you. Please. I've never married an interracial couple before. I've never even considered the possibility. And when I saw you both walk in here, my first instinct was to find a way to avoid performing the ceremony. Why? Because it makes me uncomfortable. Because it challenges ideas I've never questioned. Because it forces me to think about things I'd prefer to ignore. And what do you think about now? Judge Brennan looked at Billie and James. Two educated, articulate, obviously devoted people asking for nothing more than legal recognition of their commitment to each other. I think I've been wrong, Charles said quietly. I think I've been letting my discomfort with change prevent me from doing my job properly. What is your job? To uphold the law. To provide equal treatment under the law. To perform civil ceremonies for any legal couple who requests them. And are we a legal couple? Yes. Then will you marry us? Judge Brennan looked down at their marriage license, then back at their faces. Miss Holliday, Mr. Monroe, if you're ready, I'd be honored to perform your marriage ceremony. The ceremony took 5 minutes. Charles read the standard vows, pronounced them husband and wife, and signed their marriage certificate. But something had changed in those 5 minutes. Not just for Billie and James but for Judge Brennan himself. After the couple left, Charles sat alone in his chambers, thinking about what had just happened. In 15 years on the bench, he'd never had his assumptions so thoroughly, so gently, so devastatingly challenged. That evening, he went home to his wife Margaret and told her about his day. Charles, Margaret said after listening to his account, you realize what this means, don't you? What? If you were wrong about interracial marriage, what else might you be wrong about? The question kept Charles awake that night, and the next night, and for weeks afterward. 3 months later, Judge Charles Brennan submitted his resignation from the bench. In his letter to the court administration, he wrote, "After 20 years in the legal profession, I have discovered that I have been interpreting the law through the lens of personal prejudice, rather than legal principle. I believe I can serve justice better by stepping aside and examining my own assumptions before continuing to make decisions that affect other people's lives." Charles enrolled in sociology courses at Columbia University, studying race relations, social justice, and the history of civil rights law. He volunteered at legal aid clinics, providing services to people who couldn't afford private attorneys. 2 years later, he reopened his law practice, specializing in civil rights cases. His first client was a black couple seeking to adopt a white child whose parents had been killed in an accident. "Judge Brennan," the woman asked during their first meeting, "why did you decide to take civil rights cases?" "Because someone once taught me that the law should protect people's rights, not other people's comfort," Charles replied. Billie Holiday and James Monroe remained married for 3 years. Their marriage ended not because of racial incompatibility, but because of the normal challenges that end many marriages: career pressures, different life goals, the difficulty of maintaining relationship in the public eye. But their brief marriage had a lasting impact that extended far beyond their personal lives. Judge Brennan went on to handle dozens of civil rights cases, using his position to expand legal protections for interracial couples, integrated schools, and equal housing rights. In 1965, when the Supreme Court declared anti-miscegenation laws unconstitutional in Loving v. Virginia, Charles Brennan was in the courtroom as an observer. After the decision was announced, a reporter asked him for his reaction. "I learned 17 years ago that the law should be about justice, not tradition," Brennan said. "Today's decision simply makes that principle official." The reporter asked what had taught him that lesson. "A jazz singer who wanted to marry the man she loved," Charles replied. "She showed me that everything I thought I knew about marriage and society was really just fear disguised as wisdom." Billie Holiday never spoke publicly about her encounter with Judge Brennan. When asked about the challenges of interracial marriage, she simply said, "Love doesn't see color. People see color. And that's their problem to solve, not mine." But people who were present in the courthouse that day remembered it as a moment when quiet dignity had triumphed over entrenched prejudice. When two people asking for simple equality had transformed someone who initially wanted to deny them that equality. The story of Billie Holiday and Judge Brennan never made headlines. There are no court transcripts of their conversation, no official records of the moment when a judge's worldview was fundamentally altered. But the ripple effects of that afternoon continued for decades. Charles Brennan's civil rights work influenced dozens of legal decisions. His legal clinic provided services to hundreds of people facing discrimination. His transformation from someone who questioned interracial marriage to someone who defended it in court demonstrated the possibility of fundamental change in people who seemed set in their ways. Most importantly, the encounter demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful activism comes not from confrontation or argument, but from simply insisting on being treated with dignity while living your life according to your own values. Billie Holiday came to the courthouse to get married. That's all she wanted. But by refusing to accept less than equal treatment, by questioning the assumptions behind the judge's reluctance, by maintaining her dignity in the face of institutional prejudice, she accomplished something more significant than getting married. She showed a judge that his comfort was less important than other people's rights. And in doing so, she helped create a legal advocate who would spend the rest of his career ensuring that other couples wouldn't face the same obstacles she had faced. Sometimes the most important changes happen not through dramatic confrontations, but through calm insistence on being treated as fully human. Sometimes the most effective way to challenge someone's prejudice is to force them to articulate it clearly enough that they can hear how it sounds when spoken aloud. Judge Brennan had been prejudiced against interracial marriage until he was forced to explain why. In trying to justify his position, he discovered he couldn't. And in discovering he couldn't justify it, he began to question everything else he'd accepted without examination. The 15 minutes Billie Holiday spent in that courthouse changed one man's career, and through him, hundreds of other people's lives. Not through anger or confrontation, but through the simple insistence that love deserves legal recognition, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it. The impact of that October afternoon extended throughout New York's legal community. Other judges heard about Brennan's resignation and began questioning their own assumptions about race, marriage, and social order. Some dismissed his transformation as weakness or excessive liberalism. Others began examining their own judicial decisions more carefully. Judge Patricia Collins, who worked in the same courthouse, later recalled, "Charles's resignation forced all of us to think about whether we were interpreting the law or imposing our personal beliefs. It was uncomfortable but necessary. Brennan taught us that being a good lawyer means being willing to be wrong about your fundamental assumptions," said Robert Martinez, who worked at the clinic in the 1950s. "He showed us that intellectual humility was actually a form of professional strength." The clinic handled cases that other firms avoided: interracial adoption, integrated housing, employment discrimination, voting rights. Brennan's transformation from reluctant marriage officiant to civil rights advocate gave him credibility with clients who'd been denied legal services elsewhere. People trusted him because he'd been honest about his own prejudices, Martinez explained. He never claimed to be naturally enlightened. He admitted he'd had to learn to do better. In 1962, Brennan was invited to speak at the Columbia Law School graduation ceremony. His speech, titled "The Education of a Judge," became one of the most requested reprints in the school's history. "The law school taught me legal principles," Brennan told the graduating class. "But a jazz singer taught me justice. She showed me that the most important legal education happens when we're forced to examine whether our interpretation of the law serves justice or just serves our own comfort. Every lawyer in this room will face moments when personal bias conflicts with professional obligation. How you handle those moments will determine not just your career, but the kind of justice system you help create." After the speech, a student asked how lawyers could overcome unconscious prejudices. "You have to be willing to be corrected," Brennan replied. "You have to create situations where people can challenge your assumptions safely. And when they do challenge you, you have to listen instead of defending. Most importantly, you have to remember that being wrong about something is the first step toward being right about it. My encounter with Miss Holliday was painful because it forced me to admit I'd been wrong. But that pain led to the most meaningful work of my career." Brennan continued practicing civil rights law until his retirement in 1975. At his retirement dinner, colleagues presented him with a framed photograph. Billie Holiday on stage, singing with her eyes closed, completely absorbed in her music. The inscription read, "To Charles Brennan, who learned that justice, like music, requires both discipline and heart." In his retirement speech, Brennan said, "People sometimes ask what inspired me to work in civil rights law. The answer is simple. I once tried to deny two people the right to marry because I was uncomfortable with their choice. They taught me that my comfort was irrelevant to their rights. Every case I've handled since then has been an attempt to apply that lesson." Billie Holiday and James Monroe divorced in 1951, but they remained friends until Billie's death in 1959. James went on to become a prominent civil rights attorney, handling cases throughout the South during the most dangerous years of the civil rights movement. In interviews, James always credited his brief marriage to Billie with teaching him that personal relationships could be forms of political activism. "Billie understood something that took me years to learn," James said. "That the most radical thing you can do is live your life with integrity, regardless of who disapproves." Our marriage was political not because we intended it to be, but because our love threatened people's assumptions about how society should work. When Billie died in 1959, Charles Brennan attended her funeral. He was one of hundreds of mourners, but he felt a personal debt to the woman who changed his life with a simple question: "What law prevents you from marrying us?" At the funeral, Brennan met James Monroe for the first time since their courthouse encounter 11 years earlier. "Mr. Monroe," Brennan said, "I want you to know that your wedding ceremony was the most important 5 minutes of my judicial career." "Why?"